The race for the U.S. Senate is shaping up to be a fascinating one in our state for 2012. No Republicans in the race yet, but 3 Democrats are. They are former Secretary of the State Susan Bysiewicz, State Representative William Tong, and Congressman Chris Murphy, our guest this Sunday morning. And with us now is Congressman Murphy from the 5th District. Congressman Murphy, good to see you back in here again. That's a tough district to have to roll off your tongue every day, but you've been doing it for years.
That's right. Thanks for having me back.
Well, good to be here. Yeah. Let's talk about Afghanistan first, because this is becoming a little bit of a campaign issue. Where exactly do you stand on it? I know Mrs. Bysiewicz has been accusing you of being waffling on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what she's saying, but I know where I stand, which is that we need to bring our troops home. We need to stop being the day-to-day combat operators on the ground in Afghanistan. And I'll say this, I opposed the Iraq War, ran as an anti-Iraq war candidate in 2006 against Nancy Johnson for a number of reasons, but not least of which was that I thought it was distracting us from a war that was worth fighting, and that was the war in Afghanistan. That is where al-Qaeda trained its men to attack this country, and the problem is that we should have been there for 3 or 4 years, not 10 years. I just came back from a trip to Afghanistan, and it confirmed for me what I had already believed, which is that 10 years is enough, that we have, I think, made important strides in training the Afghan army and the Afghan military, so that I think they are on the verge of being ready to take control of the security of their own nation. But more importantly, the most important factors to the future, I think, success or failure of the Afghan state are outside of the control of U.S. soldiers. We have the best and bravest Americans imaginable there. If anybody could do the job, they could. But whether it's the increasing poppy production in southern and western Afghanistan, the increasing corruption of the Afghan government, which is not providing a real alternative to the Taliban, to the Afghan people, or the deterioration of Pakistan, even before the bin Laden raid, so that it remains and continues to be a safe harbor for these insurgents who run back and forward, it's time for us to withdraw from that country. And I have elevated my voice on this subject as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the past several months.
What's the timeline for withdrawing troops from Afghanistan? When do you want to see them all gone?
Sure. I think you can have our combat troops out of Afghanistan by the end of this year. This is not something that can happen overnight, and so the president would have to put a real strategy to safely withdraw our combat troops. I do, though, think that we will likely pass this year have a limited mission to finish the training of the Afghan army and police forces, and a temporary counterinsurgency mission there. I think it's much more efficient for us over the course of next year, for instance, to be focusing on small pockets of al-Qaeda should they reemerge with counterinsurgency missions rather than by occupying the field of battle on a daily basis.
What do you tell, the liberal factions in this state, the my left nutmeggers, so to speak, who want the troops out now? They don't want to wait.
Well, I guess I don't necessarily see a lot of daylight between people who have been advocating for a long time on the wars and in my position. I think that we need to bring our combat troops home as soon as safely possible. And
the end of the year is the soonest?
Well, I think the end of this fighting season, which goes through the spring and the summer, and I think that process should begin now.
So by the end of the summer, you think they'll?
Sure. I think this process should begin now, and as soon as it is safe to be able to bring our combat troops home, we should do that. That just isn't a week from now or a month from now.
You were in Afghanistan just a couple days before Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan. Did you have an inkling as to what was going on while you were there?
No, we didn't, and that's a good thing that we didn't, because it meant that the operation was as safe and secret as we know it was. But we were in the Special Operations Combat Center on Friday evening, only 2 nights before that raid was run out of that very place. And, it's gratifying to know that we were likely the last visiting congressional delegation to see the wanted poster of Osama bin Laden on the wall. We saw that night how capable our Special Forces operations are, and we were thrilled 3 days later as we were heading back to the United States to hear the news of the operation's success.
Do you think he should have been captured rather than killed?
I don't think it's a smart thing for us to second guess lost that SEAL team as they went in the dead of the night into a dark, shadowy compound. So if he was resisting or making it look like he was resisting, then I think it was perfectly within their rights to shoot to kill.
Let's talk about the Guantanamo trials. They're now going to be held on the island of Cuba. Initially, they were pushing to have them where Eric Holder wanted them in Manhattan. How do you feel about this? Where should they be held?
Well, I think it depends on who we're talking about. So what I have said all along is that Guantanamo Bay, the Guantanamo operation should be closed, and that we should bring those individuals slowly but surely back to U.S. soil. We should find a safe and secure place here. Now, whether they are tried in civilian courts or military courts, I think is a matter of individual decision based on the case. But Guantanamo Bay is a symbol to the rest of the world as to the perceived abuses of the American government. And I think that we should have a plan, and that the Congress should allow the president to implement a plan to close that facility.
You said perceived abuses. Do you believe that there were abuses?
Well, I think there certainly have been abuses. I mean, waterboarding is torture. And there continues to be, I think, no solid evidence that waterboarding in the end gets better information from detainees than legal methods. And so we have certainly, I think, engaged in acts which rightfully draw the scorn of people around the world. We have stopped those practices, but that facility continues to be a symbol of those past abuses.
Do you believe if a terrorist is tried in Manhattan that it's a threat to security in New York City?
Well, I think it depends on what terrorist that is. So I think if you're talking about an individual who had something to do with the bombings in New York City, yeah, then it might make sense to do that trial somewhere else. But I think it depends on the individual and depends on the case.
Let's talk about, you were in the state legislature for a while, obviously state senate. Would you have voted for Governor Malloy's budget?
Yeah, I think Governor Malloy put a budget that looked very different than ones proffered by almost every other governor and legislature out there. You know, I think a lot of us watched with horror as governors in places like Indiana and Wisconsin sought to use this budget crisis as a means to destroy organized labor and collective bargaining. Other governors who asked nothing of the affluent in order to help balance their budget crises. So I'm really proud of my governor that he did something that nobody else did. He asked for a little bit from state employees, a little bit from taxpayers, and a little bit from people who benefit from expenditures. And though, listen, I can't sit here and say that I read every word of the budget, and I would do that before I voted on it. I certainly support the framework that the governor outlined and the legislature put into action.
The new census means, of course, redrawing those congressional districts, and no one knows the 5th better than you. What advice would you give the people who are redrawing the districts? Is there any part of the 5th that should go to another district, or a part of another district that should come to yours?
Yeah, you know, I guess I hesitate to get too involved in those discussions, in part because I'm not running for re-election, but I think that it is important to the extent you can to keep cities together. And one of the peculiarities of the 5th district is that both the city of Torrington and the city of Waterbury are split between the 1st and the 5th and the 1st and the 3rd. And listen, with that comes some benefits. I would say that Waterbury, for instance, has gotten a benefit from having both myself and Rosa DeLauro representing it. But I do think for lines of accountability, it's much easier for the citizens of one city to know that they have one member of Congress. Now, that sometimes can't happen because the Constitution requires that each congressional district have the exact same number of people per the census as every other district. But I would hope they'd try to fix those situations in Waterbury and in Torrington.
Let's talk about the Senate race. Of course, you've been in it since January, right after the first of the year when Senator Lieberman announced he was retiring. Now, if 3 Democrats running, Susan Bysiewicz, William Tong, possibly a 4th, Frank Borges is telling Eyewitness News that he's still thinking about it. No Republicans yet. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me in the sense that if it was up to me, I would have loved to have waited to get into this race. But one of the primary reasons why someone like me, who doesn't come from a wealthy background or have money of my own, needs to get into the race this early is that these things are darn expensive. And in order to raise the ungodly sums reforms that are necessary, you have to start early. On the Republican side, if you believe the reports that Linda McMahon is seriously considering it, she doesn't really need to get into the race early because she's going to fund the entire thing out of her bank account, and her name recognition is pretty strong to begin with. So I'm not surprised necessarily to the extent that the candidate ultimately is going to be somebody that funds the race out of their own largesse.
What does your gut tell you? Is she in?
I have no idea. I certainly know that she's making her way around the state. I certainly hear that she's got some interest, but for me, I'm not frankly focused on either the Democratic candidates in the race or the Republican candidates in the race. I'm focused on doing the job that I have and having that be the best advertisement for my Senate campaign going forward.
Well, let's talk about the other Democrats in the race, Susan Bysiewicz and William Tong. There's certainly a lot of diversity in the race this year. First, she would be the first woman elected to the Senate from Connecticut. Should she win? William Tong, the first Asian American. Is it tough running in a race where there are so many historical footnotes to it?
I don't think so. That's certainly an interesting subtext to this race or to any other race. But no, I have faith that this race will be ultimately decided on the issues and will be ultimately decided on my record of fighting for health care reform, energy reform, and end to the wars. And I think voters will compare that against the records and positions of my opponents, both in a primary context or in a general election.
I know you don't want to see it happen next year, but do you think that in your lifetime there'll be a woman elected to the Senate from Connecticut?
I hope so. I hope so. It's just been gratifying in the short period of time that I've been in elected office to watch the increases in the number of women who are both in and running for the state legislature and the United States Congress and the United States House. In this case, I hope that that moment is postponed in Connecticut for more than 2 years, but I think that you certainly are going to see more women running and more women being elected.
When do we expect to see debates between the three of you?
I have no idea. I hope that it's not for a period of time in the sense that I think
summer, or
I just don't know. I think that we're better off in the short run taking the time now to introduce ourselves. And my fear sometimes is that when you get into debate contexts, the race becomes more negative earlier than it has to be. So certainly I'd welcome the opportunity to sit next to anyone else who's running for the United States Senate, but I think now is the appropriate time for us to go out and introduce ourselves individually to the people of the state, and on the Democratic side, Democratic leaders throughout the state.
So you wouldn't necessarily decline an invitation to a debate at this point?
I can't imagine how this campaign will sort of play itself out, but I've never walked away from an opportunity to talk about the issues with anybody else that's interested.
The field in the 5th is wide open right now. There are no fewer than, I believe, 10, 11 candidates at last count between Republicans and Democrats. Who are you endorsing in this race? Who do you like?
Yeah, I've got good friends in the Democratic side of the race, and so I'm not getting involved. I've certainly talked to all 4 of the candidates that have announced so far, and I think all of them strike me as very good candidates and ultimately good standard bearers for our party. But at this point, I'm focusing on my own job and my own campaign.
Many of them would love your endorsement, but you don't want to endorse until when? Do you think?
I don't know whether I will endorse in the race. So again, I've got my hands full with getting around the state and introducing myself, and again, frankly, doing the job that I have, and that's important to me. Is that I do think the best advertisement for me as a Senate candidate is to show that in this miserable environment in Washington, D.C., where this new crowd of Tea Party Republicans is attempting to demonize everything and anything about government, that if I stand up for my values as a Democrat, if I fight the Ryan budget to preserve Medicare and Social Security, if I'm defending the role of our social safety net, that ultimately that will, I hope, be the best commercial I could ever run for a Senate race. That means, frankly, that I might not be as involved as people would like me in other races, such as the race for the 5th Congressional District. Looking at some of the numbers that obviously you have, do the Democrats win back the House in 2012? I think we have a good shot. I think the challenge is redistricting. We have in Connecticut a blessing, which is a largely nonpartisan redistricting process. That's not the case in a lot of other states, and so there are going to be a lot of Republican legislatures and governors that are going to try to turn seats to the Republican side. But I think the Republicans have overstepped here. They are seeking to privatize Medicare, to turn it into a voucher program. They held up the shutdown of the government, over defunding contraception and family planning. I'm there right now to stop that radical effort on behalf of Republicans, and ultimately I think it may be their political undoing next November.
Congressman Chris Murphy, good to see you back here in the program. Best of luck in the campaign. We'll
Thanks
see
a lot,
you
Dennis.
again.